Good morning from a somewhat bleary-eyed Hibs observer off the back of last night's antics. It feels like that game finished about half an hour ago. Yes, but the big news is Hibs are into the Conference League playoff rounds. But unless you were sitting in a dark room sealed off from the rest of the world last night, you will know that that does not tell half the story of what went on at Easter Road last night. So Patrick McPartlin and I are here this morning to try and make sense of it. We can't guarantee that we will be able to make sense of it, but we're going to give it a go anyway. Thanks for joining us, folks. As always, just before we get started, a word for our sponsor, the Hibs Observers, brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. So start your search today. Patrick, how are you this morning, dare I ask?
I think I've just about got my breath back after what was I was going to say roller coaster 120 odd minutes at Easter Road, but I feel roller coaster doesn't really begin to cover it. I think you've heard a few of the Hibs players say like we don't do things the easy way here, and I'd be inclined to agree with that. And I think also I saw a tweet last night from Duncan Mackay, a well-known East Lothian-based Hibs fan, who said that, ladies and gentlemen, was 150 years of Hibernian Football Club in one match. And that, I think, for me, that just sums it up, because it really was like an outrageous goal from Kieran Bowie. You've got some mistakes, you've got that sort of heart and mouth moments, you've got last gasp goals, and it's just like the whole sort of like peaks and troughs of emotions. And I just think I think David Gray probably summed it up best in post-match when he said something along the lines of it's more about character than about tactics or ability. And I think on last night's show, I'd be inclined to agree.
Yeah, absolutely. It was crazy, really. I mean, I hadn't actually I hadn't actually thought too much. But I know this sounds stupid because it's my job to go and cover the game. But like, I hadn't actually thought too much pre-match about how this could potentially pan out. I think I don't know. Maybe it's just you kind of have a kind of faith in this Hibs team to get the job done one way or another. But I thought they would make it would be a kind of professional job. It would maybe be a sort of controlled effort. Maybe a 0-0, one each. Nothing boring almost, which is probably what David Gray wanted. I hadn't actually given too much headspace to the possibility that all hell could break loose last night. But it did, but it's one of those things where it's obviously as a coach, that game is not going to have panned out how David Gray would have planned it. He would have been looking for something a bit more controlled, a bit less chaos, if you like. And I think a lot of Hibs fans would have wanted it to pan out that way as well. But at the same time, if it does, then people don't get moments like that Kieran Bowie goal. They don't get the Chris Cadden winner. You don't get the high of winning that game last night. For these fans would have been so much, would have been amplified so much because of what happened in the first half. And that's just, I suppose that's just football. And I think at the end of the day, it is all about the kind of the moments that people remember. Because I mean, David Gray said that last night that it'd be a special night either way if Hibs went through, and he's not wrong. But I mean, the extent to that game will be talked about with the way it actually panned out compared to if Hibs had drawn 0-0 and gone and kind of just strolled into the next round. That is, they're in completely different universes. That goal last night for Kieran Bowie is something people will be talking about for years, and it was, I think, probably. I know we're jumping ahead of ourselves a wee bit because there was a lot happened before that, but I think there's probably only really one place to start in terms of talking points from that game. I mean, have you seen many better goals in the flesh than that?
I'd be struggling to name a few. I mean, in terms of like the magnitude, the importance, probably not, to be honest. We've all seen good goals. I mean, you think of Jack Iredale's in the derby last season. Obviously, a fantastic strike in a derby match, the winning goal, his first goal for Hibs. He's a defender. He doesn't score many goals, so that's got its that's obviously got like its own. It almost feels unfair to put them in the same bracket because that was let Jack have his moment. And also probably should point out that it was Iredale who got the assist for Bowie's goal. So, he's got that over him as well. But I think, I think the timing of the goal and the manner of the goal coming when it did, when, Hibs were kind of on the ropes a wee bit, 2-0 down, it just felt a bit like, such a turning point. And I mean, we heard Sergej Blagojevich, the Partizan manager, afterwards saying pretty much the same thing, that, a goal like that, it's like it's a one-off, it's a bolt from the blue, and, just kind of changed the whole complexion of the game, even with Partizan scoring that late goal in injury time to take the game into extra time, take the tie into extra time. I think he sort of felt it was one of those things that kind of tipped the scales back in Hibs' favour. And I think, it's what you get from Kieran Bowie. Like, I think we saw that even when he first came to Hibs, when he was, making his first substitute appearances last season, that I think it was the Celtic game where he kind of held off Cameron Carter-Vickers, and I'm not sure there's too many centre forwards who can say they've held off Cameron Carter-Vickers, and just like unleashed that first time left-footed effort, which I think hit the bar in the end. And it was just that, that moment where you kind of thought, oh, okay, Hibs have got someone here who can, we talk about players who can create something out of nothing, but in Kieran Bowie, they've got someone who literally can do that. And I think it's interesting that David Gray keeps on saying, like, oh, there's more to come from him, there's more to come. And if it's more like that, then, Hibs fans are going to be laughing. But I think just to have do we call it balls? Do we call it kind of guts, something like that, to not only sort of, take the chance on, but to hit it so sweetly. I mean, I know a lot of people would say, it's like a 1 in a million chance or whatever. But I mean, Kieran Bowie is a very good striker. We know what he's capable of. We've seen him score good goals. So I don't think it's one of those where, just hit it, it could have gone anywhere. I think there was probably a little bit of, at least a little bit of an intention behind it. We saw him try to shoot from the halfway line against Kilmarnock on Sunday, and then he tried it again after he'd scored the goal. So, as a player with a lot of confidence at the moment. And sometimes, in games like that, European games are different beasts. We know this. They always have been. They always will be. Mm-hmm. But I mean, sometimes in games like that, you need something like that just to change the whole complexion. And I think that's what happened. I think it was, but I don't think Partizan could believe it. I don't think Hibs could believe it. And it just gives you that little bit of extra confidence, that little sort of extra burst of pace, that little, that wee sort of inkling at the back of your mind that actually, we're not done here.
Yeah.
And we've seen this Hibs team before, that it's never wise to count them out, because they always just seem to find something. And I think, you've got a team of players, like, they're all playing for each other. You see, like, the connection, you see how strong the dressing room is, you see the celebrations after the goal, everyone's involved. And I think when you've got guys who are like really playing for each other and playing for the badge, then, you do get that little bit more. Like, you don't need a team that's full of Hibs fans. You don't need a team of players who, have sort of grown up supporting the club, but you do need that togetherness, that unity, and, that sort of, that belief as well, I think. And I think a lot of that goes down to David Gray and his coaching staff for, instilling that sense of belief in them. Mm-hmm. And I think, just chatting to some fans of a slightly older vintage, maybe would have seen some of the kind of glory European days back in the sort of 70s, sort of, said that last night was up there, which I think for anyone of a younger generation, I think that maybe tells us how seismic a night it was, and, how good it was in terms of atmosphere, in terms of outcome, and just in terms of, like, what it does for the mood around the club, especially after Sunday, to be 2-0 up so quickly and then to be pegged back, and for it to ultimately feel like a defeat, even more important. So, not just a wonder goal in the sense of the game, but just for everything else that it brought with it too.
Aye, and that's the kind of beauty of football at times, isn't it? Like, it's one of those sports where the entire complexion of the game can just swing on one single moment, and that's like, you describing that goal as just one single moment is almost sounds like you're playing it down a wee bit. I mean, it was in terms of moments, it doesn't come much more significant than that. And I think, and again, you kind of, when the games these days, when games aren't going your way, when the other team's on top, the kind of first thing people sort of maybe look at is what needs to change tactically, what needs to change in the approach. But sometimes sometimes it just takes your big striker to put his boot through the ball from 40 yards out and land it in the top corner. It's football's a simple game. Sometimes that's all it takes.
That distance is getting bigger every time we talk about it, by the way.
We'll be up to about 70 yards by the time we finish this. We finish this video. But that's like, you know, again, it comes back to what you said about David Gray's comment at the beginning. Like, you know, it's not about tactics, it's not about ability. You know, you've shown. He said, you know, the players have already shown that they had the ability, but it's about, have you got the kind of the character to see this through? And I think sometimes when people, you know, they hear the word character and mentality or whatever, they think about, you know, they think of it maybe a defensive, you know, sense, like, you know, it's like seeing games out, or can you keep the other team out? But I think it's as much about guys who are willing to take responsibility on the ball, on their shoulders. I think you know, talking about bravery and stuff, again, that always has connotations of, you know, going into tackles, putting your body on the line. But there's kind of nothing braver really you can do in football, I think, than, you know, taking responsibility on the ball and being the guy who wants to make something happen. I think you could tell from the outset last night that Kieran Bowie was determined to be the guy. His general play was really, really good. Again, I know that all the discussion is obviously quite justifiably going to be about the goal, but again, it was a really good all-round performance from him. Again, we've talked about how kind of mature he is for such a young guy in terms of how he goes about his game. And you could see that he was very, very good again. He was tracking back. He made a couple of, you know, really good sort of recovery tackles even after he'd made mistakes. And it was, I think, and David Gray touched on this as well about Patrick. It was just a good moment. It was a really nice moment for him, and for him to be able to get something like that after. I think Gray was quite keen to emphasise, you know, the struggle that he's had with those two injuries. And it's been a long road back for him. I think sometimes you can, you know, when it's just a young player, you know, who's still got his entire career ahead of him, you maybe don't take that into account so much. But he missed an awful lot of football. He's, you know, it's still going to have been really, really tough for him. He'd come back up from England, kind of brought his family with him. He's thinking he's joining a new club. This is a huge opportunity for us. And then he's recurrence of an injury that he'd had previously, which I always think that must be especially psychologically challenging when it's an injury that you thought you'd already gotten over, and then it comes back and kind of takes you out again. So for him to sort of get a moment like that, it must have felt like a sort of culmination of the sort of road he'd been on. Like, because I think you could tell, I mean, quite obviously, like when he was brought up to the press room afterwards, and you'll be able to kind of see interviews with him on a website later today. That, I mean, it was a wonder that he was able to stop bouncing off the walls for a couple of seconds to be able to.
It's a wonder he was able to walk after the shift he got in.
To try and put a coherent sentence together, you could see how just how kind of thrilled he was with that, and it must mean a lot for a young man like that who has had such a tough time in trying to get himself back in the pitch.
Yeah, and I think he's one of those players who just, I think the big thing is you do forget how young he is, and I think Gray kind of was joking about this and saying, he's got a partner, he's got his kids, he's got his dog, he's like I think the phrase was he's like a 30-year-old man sometimes,
yeah.
Which may have been a bit of a dig at some of us who are in our 30s, I don't know, but
we'll
touch on that one later, I think. It's just, he is grounded. I think after getting the recurrence of the injury, I think it's just right, head down and come back sort of as strong as you can. And we heard last season about how difficult it was to kind of keep the reins on him a wee bit, that he was just so eager to do his rehab, to get back fit, to come back into it. And you look at the tail end of last season where, he was popping up the goals. I mean, he's always going to do that. He's just that player who, is going to find, he's going to find chances and opportunities. He's going to take them. But you're right to point out there that it's not just the fact that he's a good striker. It's like the work ethic. It's the shift he puts in all the time, sometimes without reward. I think back to last week in Belgrade, really good shift from him. Involved in both goals actually, and doesn't get like a goal himself, but it's just like the work that he does in sort of occupying the centre backs, sort of creating space for others, I mean, it's a tireless task,
Yeah.
and especially when you saw how much he played on Sunday against Kilmarnock, and the fact that he came off with, you know, like what looked like a wee bit of a knock, to sort of go to the well again. Just, you know, I mean, I know he's young, I know they're athletes, I know it's that sort of, you know, we're not supposed to congratulate footballers for being able to play like 90 plus minutes on a Sunday and then 90 plus minutes on a Thursday, because it doesn't, you know, it doesn't fit the narrative. Like, they're athletic, they're supposed to do that. But it's a bit different when it's the shift that he's putting in. It's everything that he does, and then he scores a goal like that. But as you quite rightly say, you know, to come back from his injuries and still be able to do something like that, because, you know, players get injuries, they come back, they're maybe not the same. You know, Martin Boyle's another player, lots of you know, injury setbacks, but just, you know, can't keep them down. And I think just it's character, like David Gray was saying, it's that mentality, it's that kind of approach to think, you know, yes, I've had a setback, but, you know, it's a cliche, but it's like, you know, you come back stronger, that kind of thing. And I think Bowie kind of embodies that. And, you know, I mean, you could see what it meant to him scoring the goal, and I think doing it in front of the Scotland manager Steve Clarke, who was watching on, probably not the worst thing to do.
No.
Not, you know, it's one goal, yes, but it's also the performance. And yeah, I certainly think it will have given Steve Clarke food for thought, if he needed any, you know, with sort of internationals coming up. But I think just a nice moment for Bowie, and, you know, I think that's what European football does. It sort of creates moments. I mean, Chris Cadden as well. I think it's almost a wee bit unfair that Bowie scored such a good goal, but, you know, Chris Cadden scores the crucial goal, but everyone's kind of almost overlooking it because of how ridiculous Bowie's was. But nice as well for Cadden, you know, and that, again, a player who's had his injury setbacks, you know, to sort of score such an important goal. You know, really nice for him to have that as well. And we'll give him a wee talking up about it just now, because it's not going to get the recognition it deserves, I suspect.
I'm sure he won't care too much.
No, I'm sure he won't, because it is all about the team, it is all about the result. But yeah, that's kind of what European football does. You get moments like this that you don't really get in other matches. It just creates, an environment that isn't sort of, you can't recreate it elsewhere, which is, I think, part of the fun of it.
Yeah, it is. It is completely different in ways that it's kind of not always possible to explain, but you can just kind of feel it, I think. So, I mean, obviously, to get to the exhilarating highs of how last night eventually turned out, Hibs had to go through some pretty low lows. And the start to the game was kind of, well, I mean, I say the start to the game, I feel like it was pretty, in the opening stages, pretty even. I think both teams had spells. You kind of expected, as they did even last week with 10 men, that Partizan were going to keep the ball well. They were going to probe, try and move Hibs around. They did that. They had a couple of times where they sort of tried to spring in behind, foiled by the offside flag. Hibs had a couple of moments themselves. Cadden himself had a huge chance. If he scores that, then everything, you know, not everything that we saw after probably doesn't happen. Rocky Bashiri had one as well. But then it all seemingly started to go wrong for Hibs with that first goal, and it sort of kicked off just like a sort of period that obviously Jordan Smith is going to want to forget. The first goal comes in from distance. He doesn't get strong hands on it. It sort of goes through him. The second one is, you know, it's even worse from his perspective. It's a fairly tame effort. He's let it squirm under his body. You know, 2 goals kind of out of nowhere, really. Suddenly Hibs' 2-goal advantage is gone. Smith himself, it's, you know, he's not going to know. He's going to know better than anybody how much he needs to do better for those goals. And it was, you know, it got to the point where, you know, people around us, you looked at people online, people were like, oh, David Gray's got to take him off. His head's gone. He's got to take him off. You know, this kind of can't go on almost. And then, I mean, we'll get to the sort of what came after first, but I mean, those 2 goals, it was just a nightmare for the goalkeeper, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. And I think it's interesting. One of the things for me is I feel that just because of the nature of football, you never hear as much from goalkeepers as pundits as you do from outfield players. And I think that's a real I think it's a real kind of blind spot in the game, because I think that it's such a specialised position, and it's quite often difficult to fully comprehend what it's like being a goalkeeper. Is when you've got somebody who's played sort of 12 years as a midfielder saying, "No, the goalkeeper should be saving that." It's easy to say that, but I mean, it's not always so straightforward in practice. And I think, you look at the first goal, it's not as if he sees it late. It's not as if it's, when you think about the goals that Michelin scored, that Smith conceded. I mean, those were powerful efforts that you think, well, fair enough, it's a good effort. Yeah. You would expect most keepers, I think, to at least get make more of not more of an effort. It's not like he wasn't trying, but you would expect them to have sort of more of a chance of saving that first shot. And it could be, it could be a combination of not quite having his feet in the right place, or sort of misjudging the flight of the ball or the speed of the ball, things like that. But it wasn't great from his point of view. Certainly one where you think he could be doing better with that. And goalkeepers make mistakes, especially if you're a goalkeeper at Hibs. You're not going to be flawless. You're not going to be perfect. I mean, it could be argued that Hibs have had their fair share of goalkeepers in recent years who've been rather prone to the odd error or six over a season. And I think that for me, the sort of big thing that's almost kind of amplified the errors is how consistent and how reliable Smith has been since he came in, since he took the gloves from Joe Bursick last season. He's been, there's not really been many, if any, goals that have conceded in that time where you've thought, yeah, Smith was at fault there. Some where you think, oh, the communication could have been better, or he maybe could have got more on it. But there was none where you're sort of pointing the finger and saying that's a goalkeeping howler, which, to be fair, we were kind of doing last night. But I mean, the second goal, I think it's just one of those, you can discuss whether he's kind of misjudged it or whatever. But I think part of it for me is almost that you make a mistake, like the first goal, you think I should have saved that. We hear quite a lot about sort of sports psychology and how footballers kind of put mistakes behind them. And if you're sort of thinking, right, I've made a mistake, I just need to concentrate really hard, put it behind me, and just play the way I can. It's almost like if you're concentrating too much, then it also has a negative effect. It's counterproductive. Yeah, exactly.
Aye.
Because I mean, that's it's as you say, it's not a particularly powerful effort. It's it's a cutback. He's hit it first time, and it's you see it happening in football. You see even sort of like top-rated goalkeepers in the world have made mistakes like that where the ball somehow squirms under them, and it could be a lot of things. I don't want to try and get inside the mind of Jordan Smith, but it's maybe even something like there's almost like a relief from him, like, oh, it's it's like a fairly easy shot. It's almost a trundler. It's an easy one, and then you almost sort of like concentration breaks, and then that's that's how it sometimes goes. Somehow goes over the line. But I think it would have been very easy to say, take him off. His head's gone. Hibs can't afford to not make the change. But I think you saw, you talk about the goalkeepers union. I think you saw, how Raphael Salinger and how Murray Johnson were with him. Saw Rocky Bashiri giving him a hug and a sort of talking to. I think in the second half of normal time, and then you saw the big hug that Gray gave him at the end that I think you posted on social media. And it's that sort of it's difficult with goalkeepers more than any other position, because if he makes a mistake like that and you say, right, I'm going to sub him off, then what does that do for his confidence? What does it do for the rest of the team's confidence? And what does it do to the outcome of the game? I mean, you could have said that after Sunday, some of his kicking wasn't great. There might have been an argument there to say, well, maybe he puts Allinger in for the European game. But it's not just about changing positions. And goalkeeper is such a specialised position. It's so unique on the pitch compared to the outfield positions. And I think, I think you have to say fair play to Jordan Smith for how he kind of bounced back. Fair play to the players for getting him through it, and also credit to Gray and the coaching staff for keeping faith in him and just saying, you've got this.
Yeah.
And that was kind of indicated, I think, in extra time, where he had those two good saves in quick succession. One was that kind of low block with his leg, the other one tipping it wide for the corner. And And it goes back to what we were saying about character and ability and stuff like that. You know that Jordan Smith is a good keeper. You know he's got the ability. You know that he's capable of pulling off good saves. You think, even off the top of my head, last season, that save at St Mirren, which I can't remember, it might have been Marco Haring. I think he's got absolutely no right to save that, but he's managed it. So, you know, there were moments last season where Smith probably won Hibs points and probably, you know, helped them get results. He's not flawless. There are going to be mistakes. It's just how you kind of bounce back from it. And I think we probably saw last night that he did kind of bounce back from it. I think he's such a kind of down to earth guy, and he's so matter of fact about these things that he'll just say, you know, that's the nature of being a goalkeeper. You learn from mistakes, and it's, you know, it's how you kind of bounce back. So quite an eventful night for Jordan Smith, especially when you consider, you know, last week how impressive he was in Belgrade. You know, with that header, the whole sort of human torpedo bucket hat shebang. But yeah, it's how you sort of bounce back from these things, and it would have been so easy, I think, to say, right, we'll take him out the firing line, but for Gray to sort of not do that, you know, it's one of those where you think, you know, that could have completely changed the complexion again. It's fine margins, isn't it? You know, talk about Chris Cadden's chance, talk about, you know, Bowie's goal, things like that. It's the, you know, little things can have such big impacts in these games, and I think it's things like that when it feels very much like a game of chess, where you have to just say, well, I'm not actually going to do that. I'm going to sort of stick with what we were doing because we know it works, and it's just making sure that we make it work, and that's what we saw. So
I think you're right in terms of, I don't think in these situations maybe the sort of normal rules don't apply so much to a goalkeeper, and that, you know, it is just kind of, it's not entirely uncommon in football if somebody is having a howler that the manager takes them off. Like, you know, if it's your centre mid, it's your striker, your right back, you know, it's not seen as a huge thing. And, you know, obviously the player will get criticism. They might not start the next game, but it's not, you know, it's not like this seismic event, if you get what I mean. But whereas if you take the goalkeeper off, the perception around that is so much different, because as you're right, it's a specialised position. It's completely different to any other position on the pitch in terms of, you know, not just in terms of what you do within the game, but I think the psychological demands of it. And I mean, I can understand people, and it's easy to say now with hindsight, because he did bounce back so well. But you can understand people saying, you know, well, you need to take him off for his own good. It's a mercy to take him off, and maybe in the short term, maybe it is. You know, you can clearly see he was struggling with confidence. You take him out of that situation, he doesn't have to go back out for the second half. But you know, but what does it do to him long term? You know,
yeah, exactly.
You're essentially, if you take him off, you are essentially, you know, you're burying the guy almost. You know, it becomes, it's already a story that the goalkeepers, you know, cost 2 goals, and then it becomes even more of a story that the manager has decided to, to swing the axe on him, to take him out of the game, put somebody else in. Like, how does Jordan Smith come back from that? You know, the sort of perception around him then completely changes, and I think it would have probably been, you could argue, would it have been the easier thing to do, to take him off, to sort of bow to, you know, what maybe a lot of people in the stadium thought he should do, what a lot of pundits, you know, watching the game, people on social media, obviously not, David Gray's not aware of all of that at the time, but, you know, it looked as though it could have been the easier thing to do. So to stick with him was a big decision from David Gray. And again, he said last night, you know, I never considered taking him off. But even he himself, he said, you know, I know it's easy for me to say that with hindsight, but to then get the reaction that he did from him really sort of indicates that decision. And I don't think you can underestimate how difficult that must have been for Jordan Smith to come back out and put on the display that he did in the second half and in extra time, because, you know, it's obviously his head would have been, you know, spinning a wee bit during the game as it's going on, but then sometimes you think maybe half time is a good thing for goalkeepers, and I think in a sense it probably was, but it's challenging in the sense that you then get to sit in the dressing room for 15 minutes and be alone with your thoughts as to what's just happened in that first half. At least maybe when you're out in the moment, you can sort of, and it could have been easy for him to even to go even sort of deeper into a hole, if you like, during that half-time period. But he's obviously had good teammates around him, good coaches around him, and he's come back out and he's made some really crucial saves after that. There's no doubt about it. It's not just sometimes goalkeepers who have made mistakes can then, the credit that they get for maybe making a couple of simple stops in the wake of that can be maybe exaggerated a wee bit, but I don't think that you can take it away from him that he made some pretty vital saves that were crucial to the outcome of the tie. And I don't think you can underestimate how much guts that takes to be able to go out and do that in front of 20,000 people who a lot of them are going to be on your back. A lot of them probably want to see you off the pitch. Like it takes a lot, and I think he'll know. It's not really. He'll know that first half can't happen again. There's nobody who will do that more than Jordan Smith, and it's not really constructive, I think, to come on here and sort of pillory him any more than he already has been for that. But yeah, I think you do have to give him credit for how he's reacted to it, like a lot of credit, because it's not easy. It's not easy to do that at any level of football, I don't think. Never mind, in front of a capacity crowd at Easter Road, potential group stage football on the line, something that Hibs have never done. So to come back and do what he did in the second half in an extra time, I think he deserves an awful lot of credit for that. And it was good to see that for him, because I think on a human level, you don't like to see somebody suffering like that on a football pitch. And there's no lonelier position for it to happen to you than a goalkeeper. So the way he turned it round after that was really good to see, because I think David Gray might have touched on this as well, but I've kind of thought it myself as like, for his contribution over the last however many months, if he had been the guy responsible for Hibs going out of Europe, having already been 2-0 up, he wouldn't have deserved that, really. That would have been really hard on a guy he came in to do a job in the team when the team really needed him, and he's done it really, really well. For the most part, and that would have been incredibly harsh on him. So as bad as as poor as the first half was, I think it was nice to see it get a better ending, because it would have been, as I keep saying, it would have been incredibly harsh on Jordan Smith if that had if Hibs had gone out last night, and he would have blamed himself for that, no doubt about it. So yeah, I mean we've managed. I feel like we've gone through half an hour here in the blink of an eye, and that's kind of what that game felt like last night. I mean, there's plenty more to discuss. I mean, now it's, so do we take a wee look ahead? Legia Warsaw and the playoff round.
I think we take it one game at a time, and we focus on Livingston on Sunday before we look ahead to Legia Warsaw.
I'm getting too far ahead of myself. Yeah,
you are. Like David Gray's mantra here, just like one game at a time. We're not looking any further forward than Livingston.
Yeah, I need to start listening to the manager. So yeah, I think we'll maybe leave it there for now, folks. We're going to have
before you get too ahead of yourself. So. Yeah,
before I get too ahead of myself, start counting chickens. So Patrick is absolutely right. It's on to Livingston on Sunday for Hibs. We will have more analysis of this game and the sort of wider connotations around it with myself and Craig Nisbet. That will be on our YouTube channel tomorrow, so do keep an eye out for that. We'll have more reaction to the game on the website. As I mentioned earlier on, there's been an interview with Kieran Bowie going live today. Further follow-up on that, and then we'll be building into Sunday's game against Livingston. So thank you for joining us this morning, folks. Hope you're not feeling too frazzled after that last night. A special night at Easter Road. There'll be a lot of memories people have been taken from that, and hopefully it can be the springboard for Hibs to go on and, as we said, achieve something that they've never done before, and get to the group stage, or league phase, as UEFA calls it these days, of modern European competition. So yeah, we're going to wind it up there. Thank you as always for joining us. We'll speak to you again very soon. Cheers.
Cheers.